After the murder of George Floyd, there was a reverberation that was felt around the world. Millions of people taking to the streets to demand that something change. And now, right here in the city of Minneapolis, there are people who are voting on what exactly that change looks like. On November 2nd, folks will head to the ballot box and cast their vote on whether or not they want to see the Minneapolis Police Department continue as it is with potentially some reform, or if they want to see the Minneapolis Police Department evolve into a public safety department. Yesterday, we heard from the chief of police on the issue. Take a listen.
I'm very intentional in doing my best to keep the Minneapolis Police Department as apolitical as I possibly can. Roughly 21,000 signatures were gathered to petition to have the Public Safety Initiative ballot added next month in November. Minneapolis has 420,000 residents. That is roughly 5% of our population. First and foremost, our officers need support. They need the tools, the equipment, the training, and funding to do their jobs. We are at a critical point of public safety in our city. Back in 2018, I went before our city council and I asked for 400 more officers, knowing what we could be up against in the coming years. We're flatlining right now. We are down a third. To vote on a measure of reimagining public safety without a solid plan and an implementation or direction of work, this is too critical of a time to wish and hope for that help that we need so desperately right now. As your chief of police, I would not be in favor of this ballot amendment. Here is what I can tell you ballot question number 2 will not do for you. It will not eliminate tragic incidents between police and community from ever occurring in our city. It will not reduce the disproportionate violent crime disparities involving African American victims that has been a public health crisis in our city for decades. It will not suddenly change a culture of a police department that has been in existence for 155 years. It will not engender trust or confidence in new economic and business development, tourism, and entertainment opportunities for this great city of ours.
So in essence, the chief of police in Minneapolis is asking residents to vote no. He does not want to see the Minneapolis Police Department evolve into a public safety department. Ben, I know that we have covered this. We followed. There was back and forth on whether or not this question was even going to appear on the ballot. Chief Arredondo pointed out yesterday that about 5% of the population in Minneapolis pushed to get this question on the ballot. And now there's actually some polls that are showing that the city's divided. It goes back and forth between 51 and 49%, or between 40 and 60%, depending on where you look, of people leaning towards evolving the police department into a system of public safety. Now, this isn't a radical idea. I mean, there are a lot of cities across the country that have public safety departments versus a police department. Ben, what are your thoughts on this?
You know what? First, good morning, Georgia. We've been following this. You've been covering it. We actually had a chance to speak 2 days ago with Candace Montgomery, the co-executive director of Black Visions there in Minneapolis, and Minister Janae Bates, the comms director for Yes for Minneapolis. And they were speaking exactly about the Yes on 2 campaign. And the data that you're sharing, that percentage split, the polling that shows there's like a vacillation back and forth between 51% and 49%. That means that it is a rigorous public debate. And, you know, I would like to say shame on the chief for weighing in to try to put his weight on the scales. But that's what people in that kind of position do. That's what the police system is here for. The police system is not necessarily here for the people. It's here to sustain itself. And so clearly, Yes on 2 is a budgetary threat to the police department. And so, of course, that chief is going to come out and say, vote no on it, when there's a good percentage of the population are saying they're going to vote yes.
Well, and the other thing that really concerned me after watching this entire press conference was the fact that he really leaned in on the community violence And he was saying, you Black residents in Minneapolis are 400% more likely to be killed by somebody off the street than they are to be shot and killed by an officer.
That bothered me.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. Yes, Minneapolis, while the world turned to this city because of what happened to George Floyd, and then obviously what happened with Daunte Wright, the world is not really following the fact that more than 13 children have been shot and some killed in the last few months here, and the police says it's because the police department is down to, I think, like a third of where they're supposed to be. But we know that, police are not, like, this isn't a new issue. Right. Minneapolis was considered Murderapolis in the 90s, and there was no George Floyd then, and so while, yes, statistically speaking, you might say that someone who's Black in Minneapolis is 400% more likely to be killed by someone off the street than they are an officer, it still doesn't solve the problem that there is a chance they could be killed by an officer because of what has transpired. And we're still learning exactly what's transpired. The Department of Justice is in the middle of their investigation, and we'll learn more once those trials start in the next few months. But there has been obviously something that wasn't right that led to the DOJ launching that investigation to begin with. And so it feels it feels a bit inauthentic to take the two issues and pit them against each other.
Oh, yeah. No, you hit that spot on. Now, that is a part that I would clearly say the chief should be ashamed of. A Black man who is parrying the forwarding, and parroting is the word I was looking for. He is parroting the white supremacist talking points about Black on Black crime. I would like to ask this Black chief a question. What have you done to stop it? Why are you able to confidently quote these statistics, but you are in the position to provide public safety? And because you have not only not provided public safety in the form of addressing the violence that is ubiquitous in Black communities across the country, and instead of just pointing it out, Georgia, why would that Black man not point out the fact that crime is literally an economic phenomenon? And that the reason we see so much crime in Black communities is because we see so much poverty in Black communities. And I want to ask that Black chief a question. Does he believe that crime is there because we're Black or because we're poor? Because the way he answers that really determines whether or not any policing agency is capable of policing us. Because we got to stop penalizing poverty. People are committing crimes of desperation, especially in a pandemic when the government has completely abdicated its responsibility to take care of us.
Well, and the interesting thing is there was a report out by the CDC that homicides are at like the highest rate, U.S. records, highest ever increase in nation's homicide rate. That just came out, I think, 2 weeks ago, that we across our country, this isn't an issue that is exclusive to the city of Minneapolis.
That's right.
This is not an issue that is exclusive to communities that are having these very politicized trials of cops who are using excessive or fatal force. This is probably a result of the pandemic that we've been in and people losing their jobs. And like you said, maybe going from living paycheck to paycheck to now not having a check. And we know that poverty is a direct link to an increase, especially in violent crime. So, it's interesting. We heard him say there in the soundbite we played that he was going to try to keep this apolitical, but it just felt very political. And
that's right.
We'll see. We will see. The people will go out and vote, and we will learn November 2nd what will happen in the city of Minneapolis. Either way, Ben, I think one thing regardless, I've spoken to a lot of people who sit on both sides of this issue. I've spoken to a lot of people who say vote no, that we need the police, that they deter the violence. I've spoken to Janae as well. I've spoken to a lot of people on the vote yes side who feel like there needs to be this total overhaul. But either way, one thing is certain on both sides of these issues. People do feel like change is needed in the police department. They're just not united in what that change looks like. So even if the Minneapolis Police Department does not evolve into a system of public safety, there's still reform that is needed to not only mitigate there being another George Floyd, but to also address the increase in violent crimes, right? So change is needed. It is.
Right. That's right. And the only other thing is I would say about this, Georgia, is that I really do want across the country, if we are going to be forced to have to deal with police, then we need policing agencies who clearly understand that their job is not to just say, oh, there's nothing that we can do about it except you give us more money. All of these reforms that he's talking about, all the things that police chief is talking about is going to lead to them getting more money, when the problem is the community needs that funding. The programs need that funding. The after school programming needs that funding. The job training programs needs the funding that the police have been seizing all this time.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. It will be interesting. I feel like the world is continuing to watch what Minneapolis will do. Having a public safety department would allow there to be professionals, whether it's, mental health professionals, just different social services. So it's not always police responding when folks call in and they're having an emergency. But, on the other side of that, people are arguing and saying that it puts a commission of 14 people over the chief of police, and that is going to cause even more issues. And so, there's a lot to come out here, Ben. I'm obviously going to continue following this through the November 2nd vote, and we'll see what happens here in Minneapolis. But I understand you have been tracking a story this morning as well.
Yes, Georgia, it is one hell of a morning for anyone who wanted something progressive from the Biden administration. A couple of clips and information here about the new bill. The Democrats, according to CNN, has ditched the paid family leave component from their bill on Wednesday, and it's taken out of their vast social safety net program, and yet another cave to Senate moderates, including Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Now, here's the problem, Georgia. They have been whittling away at this bill, taking out everything that is meaningful for anyone. They've reduced, it's in every aspect imaginable. We have now gotten to the point where this is just a piece of paper. Let's take a listen into this clip that gives a better insight into what's going on with this legislation.
In her latest Dear Colleagues letter, Speaker Pelosi says she has asked the Rules Committee for a hearing tomorrow to advance the president's agenda. For the average American who just wants to know when these votes might actually happen, what on earth does that mean?
They're going to prepare to be able to bring this legislation to the floor once it's ready. There is a big development, though, in these negotiations. We have just confirmed multiple sources telling us that the paid leave provision of this bill will not be included. It has been dropped from negotiations because of opposition from Senator Joe Manchin. Now, remember, that was a 12-week paid leave proposal, and that it was scaled back to 4 weeks in hopes to get Senator Manchin on board, and he's just not done it. Some of my sources say they're not giving up, though, until the bill is written. But for the time being, this big Democratic priority of paid family leave, something that the United States is one of the only developed countries that does not have, will not be in this legislation.
Here's how White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki framed the discussions with the president?
Last night, as you all know, the president met with Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin in the Oval Office and continue to make progress on finalizing details as we work toward an agreement. The president remains open to going up to the Hill. We haven't made a decision to do that, and we are making decisions hour by hour.
Senator Bernie Sanders, of course, a key part of some of these negotiations. He specifically wants to ensure that there's a Medicare expansion for both dental, vision, and hearing in all of this. It's unclear how much of that is going to make it into the final legislation. So the president having a one-on-one conversation with the senator earlier this afternoon.
Now, Georgia, there's a lot of information that just came out of that clip, but here's some key components. We went from 12 weeks of paid leave to 4 weeks, and that wasn't good enough for Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin said, I don't want you to have any. I don't want you to have any time paid leave. We're one of the few developed nations that does not, one of two, that does not have paid leave. And Joe Manchin, who we caught on his yacht, some of the activists with Act TV caught him on his yacht, living in the lap of luxury, is doing everything that and this is a Democrat, mind you. This is a Democrat who's doing everything he can to absolutely harm the American people in the most critical time. And it's not just Joe Manchin. I also want to bring out the fact that enough is enough with these Democrats, because if you can't get the American people the basics, how can you ask them to go and vote for you in the midterms? Now, I want to share one more graphic before we move forward. This is a graphic that gives us a breakdown of all the things that have gotten the knife. And this is from NBC's national political reporter, Sahil Kapoor. And he's reporting on all of these different policies. He said 2-year community-free college, gone. Clean energy performance program, gone. Guaranteed paid leave, gone. Tax rate hikes on the rich and corporations, gone. So here we are, Georgia, and I just have to ask the question, what was the point of all of us risking our lives during the pandemic to go out and make sure the Democrats got all the power, the White House, the Senate, and the House, and they are not doing anything for us?
Yeah. Well, the issue on paid leave is really personal for me because I was a news anchor and literally lost my job. I was legally terminated because I wasn't eligible for maternity leave. And so this is an issue that is deeply personal to me. And because our country does not have something in place, my entire career was derailed, and so when you have that lived experience of how these legislations or how these bills or lack thereof affect your day-to-day life, right? Like this not only affected my livelihood, it affected my family, my career trajectory, just because I decided to have a baby. And so when you look at being a woman in the 21st century, knowing that you can be legally fired because you're not eligible for maternity leave, you kind of have like this shock of like, is it 1950? Like, what year do we live in? What country do we live in? No, this is America. And we are one, like you said, of only 2 developed countries that haven't figured this out. And I did some organizing on this issue. And what I had proposed was just let's get a basic unpaid leave mandated. And then let's build on that and try to get a paid leave. Yes, I believe in paid leave, but I think that a family, whatever your family dynamic looks like, if you choose to have a child, that is your human right. And it is protected under the United Nations human rights. I think it's like clause 16, amendment 16, something like that. It is your human right to have a child. And so if it is a human right, how are there no protections? And so I think, honestly, in the research I have done, that a lot of these politicians are not framing this issue correctly. I think if it was framed as a human right, it would move through a lot faster. But unfortunately, pregnancy by itself has oftentimes been classified as a disability or a medical condition. That's right. And changing the narrative around that, I think, would help a lot. But, the last thing I'll say here, Ben, we live in a country where it is illegal to remove a kitten or a puppy from its mother before 6 or 8 weeks. But we are asking women to give birth, and there is no protection that says that a mother can just leave her child. And when you look at the laws in most states, there are not daycares that accept children under 2 weeks old. So at a very, very bare minimum, there should be a 2-week mandate after you have a child. And even if it's unpaid, that you should not lose your job, because there's nowhere for you to even put your child before they hit 2 weeks old, let alone the fact that a doctor says you need 6 weeks minimum to recover. And that time increases if you have any complications or a C-section.
That's right. That's right. It's Georgia. It's astonishing. And the thing about it is I have come to the conclusion that it's not because our political leaders don't understand this. They fancy themselves to be smart enough to run for office. They understand what's going on. Republicans and Democrats. It's the feigning of helplessness from the Democrats that we're not going to tolerate. If they're going to sit here and pretend as if there's nothing that they can do to get Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, and get some Republicans in check, then we're going to let them know that they're incapable of representing us, because we don't have time for us to sit around. See, Georgia, I know you're tired of it. I know all of us are tired of it. We are tired of trying to explain to people who already know, and they don't want to know because they don't want to help us. And that is the only conclusion I can come to at this point, because I've been studying this a long time. You've been following this. You've been living this a long time. They know parents need to be able to go home with their kids. They just don't care. They need us to come out and make them their quarterly profit margins.
Well, I know that there are some youth even who are fed up. There have been about a dozen youth who have committed themselves to fighting against climate justice in D.C., demanding that Biden take these issues and do something about them. And I want you guys to hear from these young people who now, I believe, are on day 9 of not eating anything, trying to build awareness and get Biden to buy in on the urgency of the need for climate justice. Take a listen.
Day 8 of the hunger strike. We're mostly lying down or sitting, and we have to take our vitals like around 3 times a day. If our blood pressure or heart rate drops too much, it means we have to go to the ER. But yeah, hanging in there. You can support us with the link in my bio.
And I'm here doing this hunger strike because I would do anything for that future to be real. I have a president who said that was going to happen, who said that the U.S. government was going to make it possible for me to live my life, for my generation to live. He promised me and my generation, he promised the American people in every country on earth that he was going to cut fossil fuel emissions by 50% by 2030 to avoid the very worst of the climate crisis. I believe that he will do that. I believe that he will do everything in his power to make sure that happens before he goes to the world stage this Sunday. I keep hearing these stories about Joe Biden and the Democrats that they can't do that. That they're gonna let us burn and drown and starve in the climate crisis because Joe Manchin. They can't stand up to Joe Manchin. The senator from Exxon has taken $4 million from the fossil fuel CEOs. I ran into Joe Manchin yesterday, coming out of a meeting with his corporate donors. I begged him, and all it was him lying to me and then getting in his car and driving away while I screamed that I wanted to live. And I'm here because I am desperate and I am furious.
Wow.
Then these young people are putting their life on the line.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was looking at that, and I'm looking at them as they were standing next to, I believe it was Pastor William Barber. And And I had to ask, I'm like, are these young people? Because they're in wheelchairs, they look emaciated, they are putting their physical bodies on the line because it's that serious. We're at that juncture, not only in regards to like the pitiful politics of our politicians, but also in terms of the environment, the Sunrise Movement. Shout out to them in solidarity. And I really hope that the nation can see these young people sacrificing their bodies to get something actually done.
Well, and, it makes me think about what's happening to this attorney who has been fighting on this issue just recently this week. He was sent to prison, and he was sent to prison because he filed a lawsuit against Chevron and won. And then here comes Chevron, and they have launched this campaign against him. And Chevron has been extremely successful in launching this campaign against him to the point where they have gotten him disbarred. And so as an attorney who filed this lawsuit against Chevron because of the waste that they were putting into the Amazon, all of these different environmental issues that they were causing as a corporation, right? And he put their feet to the fire and he held them accountable, and they came back with their money. And I'll let you guys take a look. This is the latest from Democracy Now! They did a really great breakdown on this, but it shows the people who stand up against this system, especially the environment, which I feel like people aren't always paying attention to this fight. But there is a system that will resist and will press back. Take a look at this.
What's been described as the Amazon's Chernobyl. 1,700 square miles of land in the Ecuadorian Amazon devastated by decades of reckless oil drilling. 10 years ago, Ecuador's Supreme Court ordered Chevron to pay $18 billion for dumping over 70 billion liters of oil and toxic waste into the Amazon. The ruling came in a lawsuit brought on behalf of 30,000 Amazonian indigenous people who'd been suffering since the mid-60s when Texaco began drilling on their ancestral land. Chevron bought Texaco in 2000. The landmark ruling was seen as a major victory for the environment and corporate accountability. But Chevron refused to pay or clean up the land. Instead of cleaning up the Ecuadorian Amazon, Chevron has spent the past decade waging an unprecedented legal battle to avoid paying for the environmental damage, while also trying to take down the environmental lawyer Stephen Danziger, who helped bring the landmark case. With the help of dozens of law firms, Chevron has ended Danziger's legal career. He's been disbarred. His bank accounts have been frozen. He's been forced to surrender his passport. Steve Danziger has also been under house arrest for nearly 600 days after a federal judge drafted a criminal complaint charges against him for refusing to turn over his cell phone and computer. In an unusual legal twist, the judge appointed a private law firm with ties to Chevron to prosecute Danziger after federal prosecutors declined to bring charges. His case is attracting growing attention with the legal world as well as among environmentalists and human rights activists.
What's at stake is the ability to advocate for human rights in our society. I mean, the things I was charged with were I was a lawyer litigating various court orders for years. This judge just went after me. I'm the only lawyer ever in U.S. history to be charged with criminal contempt of court for challenging a civil discovery order on appeal. That's essentially what happened.
Wow.
Ben, what do you say about that?
I say that we have a hell of a fight against us. Solidarity with Attorney Doziger. And what he's going through. I saw a tweet that he sent out yesterday as he turned himself over to authorities to carry out his sentence. I believe it's a 6-month sentence. And the tweet showed him hugging his son, his teenage son. Broke me into a million pieces because while I can understand... Well, no, actually, let me start that last sentence again. I also understand that Brother Stephen is a soldier and he's out here fighting a good fight. And he's fighting against a behemoth. Like the environmental lobby and these oil companies, they literally have enough money and enough power to get a judge to appoint a private law firm with ties to their company so that they can execute a grudge against a man who stood up against their environmental waste and destruction. That lets me know that we have a hell of a fight on our hands, Georgia, as we try to protect this planet from sociopaths.
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said it better myself. I know we are on the